This is the second presentation from Module 4, Research Designs. So, how do we design research to answer quantitative questions? You'll remember from the previous presentation in your reading that quantitative research questions ask about relationships between variables. So, the first step in designing quantitative research is to determine the units of analysis and the variables. The textbook offers an example study from Dr. Beckett-Brough, and her research question is, does sports participation affect academic achievement? So I'm going to ask you to find out what are the units of analysis and the variables. Remembering from your reading that the unit of analyses are the entities being studied, so individual schools and even countries. And variables are the concepts that you will measure to see if it varies across cases. So each case is an individual entity. So if you're studying schools, graduation rates at different schools, each individual school is one case. Okay, so the variable would be graduation rates, and you're trying to examine if one school has higher graduation rates than another school. So pause the presentation for a few moments and see if you can find the unit of analysis and the variables in Dr. Brough's question. Okay, so let's check your answers. In her research question, the unit of analyses are students, the entities being studied, and the variables are sports participation and academic achievement. So the variables being those concepts that might vary from one student to another. So she wanted to examine this relationship between the two variables, remembering that a quantitative research question is interested in this relationship. So going back to Dr. Brough's question and how the variables are related to each other, if you can see, she's asking if one variable is causing change in the other. This is the difference between the dependent variable and the independent variable. So remembering from your reading, the independent variable produces change in the dependent variable. So looking at the research question and her two variables, which one is dependent and which one is independent? So if it's often easier to look for the independent variable first, the one that is causing or producing an effect on the other variable. If you need a moment, pause the presentation before we go on to look at the answers. So in this question, Dr. Brough's dependent variable is academic achievement. The independent variable is sports participation. So Dr. Brough, her hypothesis is that change in one variable, so whether or not someone decides to participate in sports, causes change in the other variable, academic achievement. So if this is the case, if her hypothesis is true, we call this a causal relationship. This is the relationship that researchers look for to confirm their research question or hypothesis. So there's another category of variables, extraneous variables, but before I get into that, I first want to review the criteria for a causal relationship. A causal relationship means that changes in one variable produces or brings about changes in another variable. So if we take a look at the research question, Dr. Brough is saying that changes in sports participation, so if a student plays sports, participate in sports, then that will have an effect on their academic achievement. And here she's hypothesizing that if you play in sports, you will have better academic or higher academic achievement. So how do we know if sports participation has an effect on academic achievement? We have to test for 3 criteria to ensure that it is a causal relationship. First criteria is association. So are changes happening in both variables? If a student is participating in sports, do they have a higher GPA than students who are not participating in sports? Okay, so there's some kind of association. Changes in one is resulting in changes in the other. But we don't yet know what's the direction of influence. This is about timing, which happens first. Maybe academic achievement influences students to get involved in sports. Dr. Bro found that it's the opposite, that it's actually sports participation that causes a change in academic achievement. This is where you're deciding what's your dependent and what is your independent variable. Lastly, and most importantly, is the non-spurious. So one is an antecedent, which is a variable that occurs before either the dependent or the independent variable. So something that existed before students started participating and started playing sports, or before they took tests or went to school. And there's also an intervening variable, and this is a variable that has that is the effect of one variable and the cause of another. Okay, let's take a look at a figure that will help illustrate this. In the top figure, we see that parents' income is the antecedent variable. So this means that it occurred before either of the other variables and likely produced an effect on them. So parents' income probably is likely to affect a student's participation in sports and will likely affect their academic achievements, such as their GPA. So Dr. Bro had to control for this variable. And in a sense, that means hiding parents' income from the equation. So if after controlling for parents' income for the antecedent, there is no association between sports participation and academic achievement, then we cannot say that there's a causal relationship. However, Dr. Bro controlled for income and found that there was still an association between the two. So she kept looking to see what about sports participation, what is it about that can have an effect on academic achievement. If we look in the bottom figure, Dr. Bro found that sports participation produces another variable, and this is called an intervening variable. She found that when students participated in sports, they had greater social capital. Social capital is, in a sense, is kind of like social network. What's the network of people that you can rely on for resources and help? So with this greater social capital, student athletes were able to translate this into greater academic achievement. So here we see how participation in sports is still the independent variable because it creates this intervening variable that then has an effect on the dependent variable of academic achievement. So Dr. Bro was able to find a causal relationship. And remember, a causal relationship is one of the most important aspects for researchers asking quantitative questions. That's what they want to find. However, say two things are associated. We also call this a correlation. So just because we found a correlation or association, that does not mean that we can assume that there is a causation in the relationship. A great example of this is the correlation between ice cream sales and shark attacks. As you see, when ice cream sales go up, so do shark attacks. So what could explain this? Does eating more ice cream make us tastier to sharks and thus they go after humans? No, there's a third antecedent variable, of course. Can you guess what that is? If you said summer or the change in seasons, you're correct. So that's the antecedent variable in this association. So we always have to be careful about this. We cannot assume that there's a causal relationship until after we check for spurious variables such as antecedents. That concludes the presentation on quantitative research design. Proceed to the next item in the module, the final presentation on qualitative research design. You may also choose to skip to the first two exercises related to this content.